I have buried 4 men and 1 good dog on this land, and I have never once been able to predict which deaths would break me and which I'd walk away from clean. That's the thing nobody tells you about a hard country. It doesn't grieve in the order you expect. It grieves sideways. So when the girl came up the wagon road in the worst dust I'd seen since the dry summer of '76, came up it walking, mind you, not riding, dragging 1 bad leg and a carpet bag that had given up being a color, I did not think here is the start of something. I thought, here is one more thing the desert will take before Sunday. I was wrong about her the way I have been wrong about almost everyone who ever surprised me. And the reason I'm telling it now, slow, in the right order for once, is that what she came carrying wasn't money or a body or a grudge, though Lord knows we get plenty of all 3 out here. She came carrying a promise she'd made to a dying man with her hand in his. And the answer she got, the answer Silas Hartwell gave her, 3 days later, standing at the gate of the only home I've ever known, that answer didn't just change her life. It changed everything I thought I understood about the man I'd worked for, and feared, and half-loved, for 22 years. Stay with me, I'll get it right this time. The wind came first. It always does out here, comes before the thing it's carrying, like a dog that runs ahead of its master to bark you a warning you can't yet understand. I was at the south fence with a fistful of staples and a temper, because the wire had pulled loose again where the cattle leaned on it, and I am too old to enjoy being on my knees in the dirt for a job I'd done 6 times that month. My name's Cobb, Elias Cobb if the parson's asking, but nobody's asked in years. I keep the books on this ranch and I keep the men, and between the 2 I keep a little leather ledger in my breast pocket where I write down things that don't fit in either column. Births of calves, deaths of friends, the day it rained an inch in August and we all stood out in it like fools and didn't speak. My wife, gone now 11 years, used to say I'd rather write a thing down than feel it. She wasn't wrong. A tally never argues with you, a tally just is. I'd marked 4 things in the ledger that week. The 5th I almost didn't write because I didn't believe it would matter. Girl come walking up the road midday, bad leg, asking for the boss. That's all I put, I've added to it since. She stopped maybe 30 feet from the fence and stood there swaying, and I watched her decide whether to keep her feet. You learn to read that, the small war a body fights with itself when it's run past empty. She won it, set the carpetbag down careful, like it had eggs in it, and straightened her spine 1 vertebra at a time, and looked at me with eyes the gray-green of sage after rain. I'm looking for Silas Hartwell, she said. Voice cracked clean down the middle from thirst, but the words came out level, schooled, eastern in the vowels, somewhere up past the Ohio. They told me in town this is his land. It's his land, I allowed. I didn't stand up right away. A man my age picks his moments to leave the ground. He know you're coming. No. He expecting anybody at all. No. Then you've made a long walk for a maybe, miss. I got up, knees announcing it to the whole county, and crossed to the fence so I could see her proper. She was younger than the dust had made her look, maybe 4 and 20, and she'd been pretty once that week, before the road took it. There was a fatting yellow bruise along her jaw that the dust hadn't put there. A man had put that there. I have a long memory for that particular shade of yellow, and what it means, and I felt the old cold thing turn over in my chest. I'll wait, she said. I've waited for worse. I believed her. I gave her my canteen over the wire and she drank from it the right way, small, slow, no gulping, which told me she'd been thirsty before in her life and survived it, which told me more than her clothes did. Her clothes said town girl, fallen on hard times. Her thirst said I have done hard things. People are mostly 2 stories laid over each other like that, and the trick is reading the bottom one. You got a name? I asked. Wren, she said, Wren Calloway. The name went through me like the wind had gone through the fence. Calloway. I kept my face shut, I've had practice, but my hand found the fence post and held it. Because I'd known a Calloway. Long time back. Before this was Hartwell's land, when it was something else, when there were 3 young men instead of one old one, and a fourth who wasn't a man at all in the eyes of the law, because the law back then didn't count him as one. Tom Calloway, Wren's father, near as I could guess from the years, and if she was his girl, then she hadn't walked up the wrong road at all. She'd walked up the only road that could have led her here. I didn't take her to Sela's. Not right off. Call it cowardice or call it mercy, I'm still not sure which. But I took her to the bunkhouse first and sat her down and got Esperanza to bring her beans and cornbread and coffee with enough sugar to stand a spoon in, and I watched her eat like eating was a job she was determined to finish well. "How'd you come to walk?" I asked. "Last stage drops at Canyon, that's 9 miles of nothing." The man who was meant to bring me changed his mind about the price. She said it flat, scraping the plate. The price went up partway. I declined to pay it. The yellow bruise. I looked at it again and she saw me look and didn't flinch, which I respected. "He come off worse than you?" I asked. A thing moved at the corner of her mouth that on a less tired face would have been a smile. "He'll be picking gravel out of his palms for a week. My father taught me to fall toward a man, not away. You can't do anything to a man when you're running. You can do a great deal when you're already inside his reach." "Your father teach you that?" "My father taught me everything worth knowing." The almost smile died. She put the fork down. "He died 41 days ago. I counted. I count things. It keeps the days from running together into one long gray thing I can't tell apart." She looked up at me then, sharp. "You count things too. I watched you do it at the fence. You counted the staples in your hand before you stood." I'm not a man who's easy to surprise, and she'd done it twice in an hour. "It's a habit," I admitted, "keeps the world honest." "It does," she said, and for one moment, across that scarred plank table, in a bunkhouse that smelled of saddle soap and coffee and 20 years of tired men, 2 strangers who counted things to keep from drowning looked at each other and recognized something. It didn't make us kin, but it made us not quite strangers, and out here that's most of the way to family. "What's the promise, Wren Calloway?" I said, quiet. "You didn't walk 9 miles and break a man's hands to ask Silas Hartwell the time of day." She reached into the bodice of her dress, not coy about it, just where a woman keeps a thing she can't afford to lose, and brought out a paper folded so many times the creases had gone soft as cloth. She didn't hand it over. She held it like the carpet bag, like it had eggs in it. "My father made me swear," she said, "that when he was gone I'd come west and find Silas Hartwell and put this in his hand and ask him one question. And then," her voice did the cracking thing again, and this time she let it, "and then abide by whatever he answered, whatever it was, even if it sent me away with nothing. I swore it on his hand while it was still warm." She looked down at the paper. "I don't even know what's in it. He sealed it. He said it wasn't mine to read, only mine to carry. 41 days I've carried it, and I've wanted to read it 41 days, and I haven't. And I think wanting and not doing might be the hardest thing a person can practice. I have done a great many things in my life. I have not always done them well, but I have never once kept a sealed letter for 41 days against the wanting. I knew right then I was sitting across from somebody made of sterner stuff than me, and I'm not ashamed to say it humbled me some." "That question," I said, "the one you're to ask him, you know what it is?" "Yes." She folded the paper away again back over her heart. "But I'll ask it of him, not you. No offense, Mr. Cobb." "No offense, Mr. Cobb. A promise has a shape. I have to keep the shape exactly or it doesn't count." She said it the way the devout say their prayers, like the words themselves were load-bearing, like getting one syllable wrong would bring the whole roof down. "It has to be him. It has to be his hand. And it has to be the question, asked the way my father gave me the words." "All right," I said, and I meant to leave it there. But the cold thing in my chest wouldn't let me. "Wren, did your daddy ever tell you how he knew Silas, what they were to each other?" For the first time, she hesitated. And in the hesitation, I saw she'd been turning this same thing over the whole 41 days, in the dark, on the stage, on the 9-mile walk. He said they'd been brothers, she said slowly. Not by blood. He said there'd been 4 of them once out here when they were young and the land didn't belong to anybody yet or belong to everybody. He said it different ways on different nights. He said they'd built something together. And he said it had ended badly and that the ending was his fault and that he'd spent 30 years not being able to say sorry because saying sorry across that much distance and that much shame is a thing most men can't make their mouths do. She swallowed. He said the letter says it for him, the thing he couldn't say. 4 of them, brothers not by blood. I knew the 4. God help me, I'd been the one who dug for the one who didn't come home. Here is what I knew that Wren Calloway didn't, and what I sat on through that whole long supper because it wasn't mine to tell. 31 years back, before the war that split the country and a smaller war that split this valley, 4 young men ran cattle on land that had no fence and no deed and no name anybody'd written down. Silas Hartwell, Tom Calloway, a Georgia boy named Prout who I'll get to, and a 4th, the best of them, the one they all looked to when the work got past what any of them knew. Cla. He was Apache, Chiricahua, from the band that wintered in the high country to the south before the army pushed them off it. He'd come down to the valley as a young man for reasons that were his own, and that he never fully gave us, and he'd stayed because the work suited him and the company for a while, suited him too. He could read water in a dry creek bed the way I read a ledger. He could put a hand on a panicked horse and have it breathing easy in the time it takes to say it. He knew that country, every spring, every saddle, every place the wind would kill you, and every place it would only try, knew it the way you know the inside of your own mouth, because his people had known it for longer than there were words written down anywhere to mark how long. The 4 of them built the first herd together, equal shares on a handshake because they were young and trusted handshakes, and it might have come to something fine and fair if the world had let it. The world didn't. The land got valuable. A railroad surveyor came through, and where there's a railroad there's money, and where there's money there's paper, and paper has a way of asking who owns a thing. And the law of that year and that territory had a clear answer about whether an Apache man could own land, and the answer was no. The answer was that Cla, who knew every spring in 50 miles, who'd kept the other 3 alive through 2 winters, could not put his name on a deed, could not hold a share the law would recognize, could be standing on land he'd worked for a decade and be, in the eyes of every court, a trespasser on it. And so the 3 white men had a choice. They could hold the land in trust for him, keep the handshake, share the proceeds quiet, let the paper lie about who really owned what, and dare the world to make them break their word. Or they could let the paper be true. 2 of them wanted to keep the handshake. Silas was one. I'll let you guess, for now, whether Tom Calloway was the other, because the answer to that is bound up in the letter folded against his daughter's heart, and it is not mine to give away early. What I'll tell you is this. It ended with Cla dead. Not murdered, not exactly, not in a way the law would have called murder, but dead all the same, in a way that 3 men carried for the rest of their lives, in a way that scattered them to 3 corners of the country and let none of them ever look the others in the eye again. I dug the grave. It's up on the rise behind the spring house, under the one cottonwood that Cla always said was the oldest living thing in the valley and ought to be left alone, and which Silas has left alone for 31 years and threatened to shoot any man who touched. I have stood at that grave more times than I've told anyone, and I have wondered, every time, what I'd say if any of the 3 ever came back to stand beside me. I never once imagined it would be a daughter, walking, with a bad leg and a yellow bruise and a sealed letter and a promise harder than the country she'd crossed to keep it. I went to Silas that evening, after I'd seen Wren bedded down in the spare room of the main house over her protest, because she didn't want to be a burden, and I told her plainly that a woman who'd walked 9 miles and broke a man's hands wasn't going to sleep in the bunkhouse with 11 cowhands, and that was the end of it. And she looked at me a long moment, and then said thank you in a voice that hadn't said it to anyone in a while. Silas was on the porch. He's 70 now, give or take. He's vague about it on purpose, and the years have folded him down small and hard, like a piece of leather left in the sun. He was watching the dark come down over the South Range the way he does every night, with a cold pipe in his teeth he hasn't lit in a decade, ever since the doctor in Santa Fe told him his lungs were finished. He keeps it anyway. A man's got to hold something between his teeth. "There's a girl in the house," he said before I got up the steps. "He misses nothing, never has. Esperanza's all aflutter. Who is she?" I'd practiced it. I'd thought walking up that I'd ease into it, lay it out gentle, prepare him. What came out was, her name's Wren Calloway. She's Tom's girl. He's dead, and she's walked all the way out here to put a letter in your hand and ask you a question, and she swore on his body she'd do whatever you answered. I have known Silas Hartwell for 22 years. I have seen him take news of fire, of flood, of a son lost to fever, and a wife lost to grief, and a market crash that nearly took the whole spread. I have never, not once, seen the thing I saw cross his face right then. The pipe came out of his teeth. His hand, that hard old hand that's never shaken at anything, shook. "Tom," he said, just the name. Like a stone dropping down a well so deep you wait and never hear it land. Then, after a long while, in a voice gone to gravel, "What's the question? Did she say what she's to ask me?" "No," I said. "She'll only ask it to your face. Tomorrow, she says, when she's washed the road off and can ask it standing up straight, the way her daddy gave her the words." He nodded slow, put the pipe back, looked out at the dark land where, up on the rise, under the oldest living thing in the valley, the man none of them could save had lain 31 years. "Cobb," he said, "go to bed." "Silas." "Go to bed." Not angry, worse than angry. Quiet, the way the wind goes quiet right before the part of the storm that actually does the damage. Some accounts a man keeps in his head and not in your ledger. This is one. Let me sit with it. I went to bed. I didn't sleep. I lay there and I listened, and somewhere past midnight I heard the porch boards creak, and I went to the window, and I saw an old man with a cold pipe and a lantern walking slow up the rise toward the cottonwood, to talk to a grave about a thing that was coming in the morning. And in the spare room down the hall, I knew without looking, a young woman lay awake too, with a sealed letter over her heart and a question in her mouth, having kept the wanting at bay for 42 days now, and one more night to go. I took out my ledger. I added to the line I'd written that afternoon. "Girl come walking up the road, midday, bad leg, asking for the boss." And under it small, because some things you write so quiet even the paper can barely hear them. "She's Tom's. The reckoning's come. God help all three of us, the two living and the one that's been waiting under the tree." I didn't know yet what the question was. I didn't know what Silas would answer. But I knew, lying there in the dark with the wind coming up again off the South Range, that whatever it was, the shape of all our lives was about to change, and that some promises, once kept, can't be unkept, no matter how much the keeping costs. Morning came the way it always does out here, hard and gold, and not caring in the slightest what it was about to be the morning of. Not in the parlor, where Esperanza had laid out the good cups and a plate of biscochitos nobody touched. Not at the long table where the family that used to be a family had once eaten. She asked him at the gate of the home corral, in the gold of 7 o'clock, because, she told me later, her father had said find him on his own land, with the open country at his back. So he can't pretend the question is smaller than it is. I was there because Silas told me to be. "You wrote it in your book," he said that morning, not looking at me, lacing his boots with hands that had got their steadiness back overnight or had decided to fake it. "You started keeping this account. You'll finish it. Stand where you can hear." So I stood by the tack room wall, a witness to a thing I had no right to witness, holding my ledger I didn't dare open, and I watched two people walk toward each other across 31 years of distance that no amount of walking could close. She'd washed the road off, borrowed a clean dress off Esperanza, whose stout wear ren is thin so it hung wrong, but she'd pinned it and stood up inside it straight as a fence rail. The bruise on her jaw had gone from yellow to a sickly green. The bad leg she'd braced somehow, I found out it was an old break, set crooked by a doctor who didn't care, and it pained her worse on cold mornings, and that morning was cold. She didn't favor it. She decided not to favor it. There's a difference, and I've come to think the whole of who Ren Calloway is lives inside that difference. Silas stopped 6 feet from her, close enough to see her face, far enough to run if either of them lost their nerve. "You're Tom's," he said, flat, testing it in his mouth. "I'm Tom's." She reached into her bodice and brought out the letter, soft creased, and held it on her open palm between them like an offering or an accusation. "He told me to put this in your hand, and then to ask you something, and then to abide your answer, whatever it is. I've kept the first part 42 days. I'd like to keep the rest now if you'll let me, before I lose my nerve." Silas looked at the letter. He did not take it. "Ask the question first," he said. That threw her. I saw it. He said the letter, then the... I know what he said. He's not here. I'm here, and I'm telling you, girl. His voice caught on something and he mastered it. "I'm telling you I can't read whatever's in that paper with a question hanging unasked over my head. I've had 31 years of things hanging unasked. I'm too old to add one more, even for an hour. Ask me. Then I'll read what your daddy was too much of a coward to say to my face, the same as I was too much of a coward to ride and hear it. Ask." The wind came up off the south range. It does that around 7, like it's clocking in. Ren closed her hand around the letter, drew a breath, and asked the question her father had carried 31 years and given to her on his deathbed, the words exact, the shape kept. Silas Hartwell, did my father do right by Cla in the end? Or did he do what you all agreed he did? I had braced for a great many questions. Will you take me in? Did you ever forgive him? What happened out here? Is there money owed? I had not braced for that one because that one came at the whole rotten business sideways, the way grief comes, and it landed on the only 2 people alive who knew what the answer cost. Silas Hartwell shut his eyes. And he stood there with his eyes shut for so long that the wind died down and came up again, and a meadowlark started somewhere out past the corral, and I realized I'd stopped breathing and made myself start. "That's 2 questions," he said at last, eyes still closed. And he knew it. Tom always could fold 3 things into one and make you carry all of them. Did he do right, or did he do what we agreed? His eyes opened. They were wet and he didn't care, and that frightened me more than anything because I'd never seen the old man let water sit in his eyes in front of another living soul. "Those aren't the same question, girl. That's the whole tragedy of it. He could have done right. We agreed on doing right." And then he stopped. "Take the letter," Ren said. Gentle now. Some of the steel had gone out of her and something kinder come in, because I think she'd understood in that moment that she hadn't walked 9 miles to confront an enemy. She'd walked 9 miles to deliver an old man from something. "Please, read it. I think you're answering the question before you know what's in it, and that's not fair to either of you. Read it first." This time he took it. "I should tell you the rest of what happened 31 years ago, because Silas is about to read it and you ought to know what he's reading toward. And because the day before I'd given you the bones of it, and bones aren't a man. Let me give you Cla whole, the way I knew him, before the law turned him into a problem to be solved." He laughed more than the 3 white men did. People forget that when they tell it solemn, like he was a noble shadow that fell across the valley and then lifted. He wasn't a shadow. He was a young man who laughed at Silas's terrible singing and beat Tom at every game of chance ever invented, and once rode 40 miles to a settlement dance, because he'd heard there was a fiddler there worth hearing, and danced, and rode 40 miles back, and was no good for 2 days after, and said it was worth every step. He had a way of going still and watching the country that the other 3 learned to trust more than they trusted the territorial maps. When Claw went still and watched the south, you brought the herd in, because weather was coming that no white man's eye could yet see. He could have left 100 times. The world out here was no friendlier to him than the law was. He stayed because of the three of them, and the herd that was a quarter his by a handshake, and a dream they all had on the good nights of a spread big enough that no surveyor and no paper and no territorial court could ever come and tell any of them they didn't belong on it. That was the dream the railroad killed, not with violence, with a form, a deed application which asked for the names of the legal owners and which had no line on it, none. The territory had seen to that, where the name of an Apache man could go. So the three of them sat up a whole night, I'm told, the night that decided everything, and argued it through. Hold the land in trust, the paper a polite lie, Claw's quarter share kept safe in the dark of a handshake forever. Or let the paper be true, 3 names, 3 owners, and buy Claw out for a fair sum, money in his hand, and let him ride off to wherever a man with money but no country could go, which in those days was nowhere good. Silas wanted the trust, the lie that kept the truth, damn the paper. Prout, the Georgia boy, wanted the buyout. He wasn't all bad, Prout. He genuinely thought he was being kind, thought money was freedom, thought a man was better off with cash and a clear road than tangled in a lie that could collapse and ruin everybody. That's the worst kind of wrong, the kind that thinks it's mercy. And Tom Calloway held the deciding vote. That's the part of the letter Silas hadn't read yet. That's the part Wren had carried 42 days without knowing she carried it. Which way did Tom vote? Her father, on his deathbed, had folded that whole night into a sealed page and a question, and sent his only child 1,000 miles to find out the answer alongside the one man left who already knew. Silas read standing up. I watched his eyes go down the page and back up and down again. He read it 3 times, the way you read a thing you can't make agree with what you remembered. The wind worried at the paper. Wren stood with her hands folded and waited, having got very good at waiting. When he finished the 3rd time, he folded it along its soft creases, careful, the way she'd taught me a letter could be handled like it had eggs in it. And he looked at her, and the first thing he said was not about Claw at all. He learned to write better, Silas said. His voice had gone strange and far away. Tom, when I knew him he could barely sign his name. This is a whole letter, spelled mostly right. Somebody taught him, or he taught himself all those years just so he could, he pressed his lips together, just so he could say this proper to me, after everything. My mother taught him, Wren said quietly. Then me after she passed, he'd sit up nights with a slate, he never said what he was practicing for. Her own eyes had gone bright now. I think I just found out. Silas nodded, looked down at the folded page, and then he did something I'll carry to my own grave. He held it back out to her. You should read it, he said. He told you it wasn't yours to read, only yours to carry. He was wrong. Or he was right then and he's wrong now that he's gone. A dead man doesn't get to keep a girl from knowing what her father was. Read it, Wren. Then ask me your question again, and I'll answer the both of them, the did he do right and the what did we agree, and you'll have the truth from the paper and from the only mouth left that was in the room. She took it. Her hands shook now, the first time I'd seen them shake. This girl who hadn't shaken walking up out of the desert with a bad leg and a yellow bruise. She unfolded it, and she read her father's words, the thing he'd practiced a slate full of nights to learn how to say. I won't give you the letter, it's hers. Some accounts a man keeps out of the ledger and this is one. But I watched her face read it and I can tell you the shape of what crossed it because a face is its own kind of page. First confusion. Then a stillness, the going still that Claw used to do watching the south, like weather was coming she couldn't yet see. Then her hand came up to her mouth, and her shoulders, which had been a fence rail for 42 days, came down, not collapsed, just down, like a load she'd been carrying without knowing its weight had finally been named. And then she wept, standing up, not bothering to hide it the way Silas hadn't bothered. He voted to keep him, she said when she could. Daddy voted with you for the trust, for the lie that kept Claw's share. He voted right. She looked up, wet-faced, almost angry through the tears. So why, Mr. Hartwell, why did he spend 30 years thinking it was his fault? Why did he die saying the ending was his to carry? He voted right. 2 against 1. You and him beat Prout. So what happened? And there it was, the real question. The one under the question her father had given her. The bottom story under the top one. Silas Hartwell looked at this girl, the daughter of the man who'd voted with him, the only one of the 4's children to ever come up that road. And he gave her the piece her father couldn't put in the letter, because you can't write the thing that shames you most. You can only say it out loud to a face or carry it to your grave, and Tom Calloway had chosen the grave. We voted to keep him, Silas said. 2 against 1. That's true, and the paper's true. But a vote's just words, Wren, words on a slate. The keeping, the doing of it, that came later, and it came in pieces every day after for years. And the doing's where it broke. He sat down on the bottom rail of the corral fence, suddenly looking every one of his 70 years. Wren sat beside him, not touching, the crooked leg stretched out straight at last. The territory came for the trust, he said. We knew they would. A surveyor named Bevins figured what we'd done, figured Claw was really a quarter owner, the deed be damned. And Bevins was the kind of man who couldn't abide a lie that did somebody good while his own life was full of lies that did nobody good but himself. So he made it his business. Threatened to bring the law down on the 3 of us. Fraud, he called it, falsifying a federal land claim, which it was, which is exactly what doing right had required us to do. Said he'd see us lose the land, all of it, every acre, and maybe see us jailed. Said the only way clear was to make the paper true. Buy Claw out, or worse, testify that he'd never had a share at all. Swear it. In a court. 3 white men's word against 1 Apache, who the court wouldn't have let testify on his own behalf anyhow. The meadowlark had stopped, the whole morning held still. And one of us, Silas said, broke. He didn't say which one. Not right off. He sat with it, the way he'd told me to let him sit with it the night before, and I understood now that he'd been buying time then for this exact morning, when he'd have to say the unsayable thing to the one person it would wound worst. It wasn't Tom, he said finally, and Wren made a sound, half relief and half dread, because if it wasn't Tom and it wasn't her, then it was me. The wind came back, it always does. Broke, Silas Hartwell said, and his voice didn't break with the word, which somehow made it worse. He'd practiced this confession in his own head so many thousand times that it came out smooth as a stone. The river's been working 31 years. Bevins had me in a corner, and I was 29 and scared of losing everything I'd built. And I told myself I'd find a way to make it right after, that I'd buy Claw land somewhere else, somewhere the law was different. That money was a kind of keeping too. I told myself the same lie Prout told, and I signed the paper that said the 3 of us were the only owners, and I let them carry it to Claw to sign the buyout, the fair sum, the money and a clear road, and I didn't ride out to tell him myself. I sent Prout with the paper and the cash because I couldn't look at him while we did it. That's the part. That's the doing. I voted to keep him with my mouth, and I sold him out with my hand. And I was too much a coward to be the one standing there when he learned which Silas was the real one. Wren had gone very white. And Claw, she whispered, took the money. Silas stared out at the South Range, where 31 years ago a young man had read the South for whether no one else could see. Took it because what else was there to take? And he rode out. And the part nobody could have known, his voice finally cracked. The territory he rode into, the land they'd pushed his people onto by then. It was bad country and a bad winter, and there'd been raids, and the army was shooting first and asking nothing after. He never made it to wherever he was going. We heard, months on. He'd been killed up near the Jela by soldiers who took him for hostile because he was Apache and alone and armed, which any man crossing that country had to be. Money in his saddlebag and no country left that have him, and that's where the road we put him on ended. So when you ask, did your daddy do right? He turned to her. Tom voted right and lived right. Tom was the one who said no to Bevins to the very end. Tom was the one who rode out after when it was done, when I'd already signed, and found Claw on the road and tried to talk him out of going, tried to give him his own quarter back, begged him to stay and fight the paper. And Claw wouldn't, because Claw was a proud man and he'd seen which way the wind was blowing in this country, and he'd rather take an honest buyout than stay somewhere one of his brothers had already proved would sell him. That's what your father couldn't write. Not his own guilt. Mine. He carried my shame 30 years because he was the kind of man who'd rather hold another man's sin than make a dead friend's daughter think ill of the living. He let you believe the fault might be his so you'd never have to come and lay it where it belonged, at my feet. He spent 30 years protecting me, and he died still doing it, and he only sent you at the end because... Silas stopped, looked at the folded letter in Wren's hands. "What's the last line?" he said. "Read me the last line. I read it 3 times and I won't believe it till I hear it in his daughter's voice." And Wren Calloway, who'd kept the wanting at bay 42 days, who'd walked out of the desert with a bad leg and a yellow bruise to keep the shape of a promise exactly, looked down at the last thing her father ever wrote and read it out into the cold gold morning. "Tell Silas the account's been carried long enough. Tell him to put it down. And tell him, if a girl named Wren is reading this to him, then I kept my last promise, and now there's only his left to keep." She looked up. "What's the promise, Mr. Hartwell? The one that's only yours left to keep?" And Silas Hartwell, 70 years old, a confessed coward, a man who'd voted right and done wrong and been forgiven by a friend he never deserved, opened his mouth to answer. I want you to understand how strange that word felt in my mouth when I finally said it out loud, hours later, into the ledger. Prout, the third man, the Georgia boy who'd thought money was mercy. 31 years gone from this valley, a name spoken only twice in 2 days and both times as a thing in the past. And there he was in the flesh, slumped against the porch rail with Esperanza's youngest holding his horse and the whole household spilled out around him, an old man near as broken down as Silas, who'd ridden in the last hard mile and hit the bell rope and then near collapsed against it. He wasn't dying. That's what the bell had been for, a body running on its last and a heart not sure it'd see the porch. But he wasn't dying. He was just old and used up, and he'd come a long way fast, and what he'd come for was already half told before any of us understood it. "Silas," he said, when the old man came up the rise behind me at a pace I didn't know his legs still had. "Silas, you're alive. They told me in Canyon you were still on the land. I didn't believe 30 years, I didn't." "Lloyd," Silas stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. His face had gone through grief and confession already that morning and didn't have a great deal left, but it found something for this. "What in God's name?" "I'm dying." Prout laughed, a wet, awful sound. "Not today. The bell was I overdid the last stretch. But I'm dying. The doctor in Tucson gave me till the leaves, and I couldn't." His eyes found Wren standing at the edge of the gathered household, and they went wide. "Lord above, you're Tom's. You've got his exact." He had to stop, pressed a sleeve to his face. "Tom's gone, isn't he? He'd be the only one who'd have sent a girl with that look in her eye. He's gone, and he sent you, and I'm too late to do it with him, but maybe." "Do what, Lloyd?" Silas's voice had gone very quiet, the dangerous quiet. "What did you ride 1,000 miles dying to do?" And Prout, Lloyd Prout, who'd thought a buyout was kindness, who'd carried the cash out to Claw because Silas couldn't bear to, reached into his coat with a shaking hand and brought out a packet of papers tied in string gone gray with age and handling. "To give it back," he said. "The money, Claw's money, the fair sum." He held the packet out and it trembled in the air between them. He never spent it, I found out. Took me 20 years to find out the whole of it, hearing men asking, following a cold trail across 2 territories because I couldn't die not knowing. When the soldiers killed him up on the Gila, the money was still in his saddlebag. All of it. He never spent $1. He carried our guilt money across the worst country in the world and into his grave, and he never touched it because Prute's voice failed and came back. Because it was never freedom to him. It was the price of a thing that wasn't for sale. He knew it the moment we handed it to him. I saw it in his face, and I told myself it was gratitude. It wasn't gratitude. It was a man taking the only thing his brothers had left to give and despising every coin of it, and being too proud and too cornered to throw it back in our faces. He took it so we wouldn't have to feel the worst of what we'd done. Both of them did that. Tom and Claw both. They spent their lives protecting the rest of us from the size of it. The packet hung in the air. The army turned it in to a territorial clerk who couldn't account for it, Prute went on, lower now. It sat in a strongbox in Santa Fe for 30 years, marked unclaimed, deceased Indian, no known kin. That's all Claw was on the paper. No known kin. He laughed again, terrible. No known kin. He had 3 brothers and a herd and a quarter share of the best valley in the territory, and the paper said no known kin. I spent the last of my own money and the last of my health getting it released. Lied, said I was executor of his estate, which God help me, I suppose I am, the only one left. And I brought it back to the only land he ever called home, to put it, I don't even know, in the ground, on the grave, somewhere it could finally stop being guilt and start being his, Wren said. Everyone looked at her. It was always his, she said. Wasn't it? Not the money, the share, the quarter, the land it bought. My father voted to keep him a quarter owner of this valley, and the law in a coward's hand took it off him, but a vote right doesn't stop being right just because it got beat. That money's not guilt money. It's unpaid wages. It's a debt this land's been carrying 31 years. She looked at Sela's, and the steel was all the way back in her now, and something else under it, the going still, watching the south, weather coming. That's the promise, isn't it, Mr. Hartwell? That's the one my father left only you to keep. He didn't send me here to forgive you or to take you to task or to be taken in off the road out of pity. He sent me to collect. I have read the next part back to myself 100 times in the ledger, and it still doesn't quite hold still on the page, so I'll just tell it plain. Silas Hartwell did not take the packet from Prute. He took Wren Calloway by the shoulders instead, gentle, the way you'd handle a thing with eggs in it, and he turned her to face the South Range, the open country, the rise behind the spring house where the oldest living thing in the valley stood over a grave with no name carved on it, because Silas had never been able to make himself carve one. Your daddy's promise, he said, and mine, here it is, out loud so the whole house hears it and there's no taking it back. His voice carried that confession-smooth voice, the one he'd worn down over 31 years of saying it only to himself. Claw owned a quarter of this valley by a handshake, and the handshake was the truest paper any of us ever signed, and I broke it, and your father spent his whole life trying to find a way to make it whole again, and dying he handed the job to you because he knew I'd run out of years before I ran out of cowardice. He drew a breath. Claw's got no kin the law'll recognize. Fine. The law's been wrong about him from the first day, but a man's share doesn't die with him. It passes. And there's only one person standing on this land with any right to carry what Tom Calloway voted to protect, and that's Tom Calloway's daughter, who walked 9 miles out of the desert to put it right, and didn't even know that's what she was walking toward. He turned her back to face him. The quarter's yours, Wren, Silas Hartwell said. Not the money in that packet that goes in the ground where Claw carried it, or to his people if Prute can find them however long it takes, and we'll spend what's left of all 3 of our lives trying. But the share, the land, the part of this valley that should have been his and got stole, that's yours now. In your name. Real paper this time, true paper, the kind the law has to honor, because by God I'll make it honor a woman's name even if it wouldn't honor his. You came to collect a debt. I'm answering. The answer's yes. Yes, your father did right. Yes, I'll keep the promise. Yes, your home if you'll have it, and a quarter of everything you can see is yours, and the first thing I'd ask you to do as part owner of this land is help me carve a name on a grave I've left blank 31 years, because I was too ashamed to admit out loud who was buried under it. The household was dead silent. Even the wind, for once, had nothing to say. Wren Calloway stood there, and I watched the answer land on her the way the letter had landed. Confusion first, then the going still, then the hand to the mouth. But this time, at the end, it wasn't weeping. It was something I didn't have a word for until I wrote it in the ledger that night. And even then, I had to try 3 times. She looked like a person who'd spent 42 days carrying a weight toward a door, not knowing what was behind it, braced for the door to open onto nothing. Onto a no, onto being turned out, onto a 1,000-mile walk home with an empty promise, and the door had opened onto a whole valley. But she didn't reach for it. That's the thing about her I'll never stop turning over. A lesser person, a person made of softer stuff, would have grabbed it, wept thank yous, fallen on the old man's neck, taken the land and the home and the ending wrapped up neat with a bow. Wren said no. Silas blinked. Prut made a small sound. I confess my own jaw came loose. Not no to keeping the promise, she said quickly, hand up. Yes to that, always yes to that. But not Mr. Hartwell, you can't give me a quarter of this valley standing at a corral fence because you feel the weight of it this morning and I happen to be the one in front of you. That's not keeping the promise. That's just moving the guilt off your shoulders onto a deed and calling it square. I watched my father do the hard version of this for 30 years. The hard version isn't a gift, it's work. She gestured at the South Range, the rise, the unmarked grave. Claude didn't want guilt money and I don't want guilt land. If a quarter of this is mine by right of what my father voted, then I'll earn it the way he'd have earned it, by working this land like it's mine because it is, by helping you find Claude's people and put that money in the right hands however many years it takes, and by carving that name on that grave today, before noon, before either of us loses the nerve. That's the promise, not the deed. The doing, you told me yourself, a vote's just words, the doing's where it breaks. Her voice gentled. Then let's not break it this time. Let's do it slow. Let's do it right. Let's do it together all the years you've got left and all the years I've got after. Silas Hartwell looked at the daughter of the man who'd spent a lifetime protecting him, and I saw him understand that Tom hadn't just sent him a debt to pay. He'd sent him a second chance to do the keeping, instead of just voting for it. All right, the old man said. His voice had gone rough as the country. All right, Wren, slow, right together. He put out his hand, that hard old hand that had signed the wrong paper 31 years ago. The hand Tom Calloway had wanted to shake one last time, and never could across all that distance and shame. Wren Calloway took it. And up on the rise, the wind moved through the oldest living thing in the valley, and the cottonwood that Claus said ought to be left alone, that Silas had threatened to shoot any man over, turned all its leaves at once and showed their silver undersides. The way they do, the old hands say, when weather's coming that you can't yet see. We carved the name that afternoon, all of us. Took turns with the chisel because Silas's hands shook too bad to finish it alone, and he wouldn't let it be finished by any hand but ours. Prut cut the first letters and wept the whole time and nobody told him to stop. Wren cut the middle. I cut the last of it because Silas said you kept the account, Cobb, you'll close it, and so the final stroke on the stone is mine, and I'm not ashamed to say my hands weren't steady either. We didn't carve no known kin. We carved the name, and the years he was among us, and under it the only word the 4 of them ever truly signed in good faith, the word that was truer than any deed. Brother. Prut died before the leaves turned, the way the Tucson doctor said. He's up on the rise too now, the other side of the cottonwood, which is closer to Claw than he ever managed in life, and which I think he'd have wanted, and which I know he didn't deserve, and which Wren said we'd give him anyway, because the dead don't get debts, only the living do, and ours is to bury them and let it be done. She's harder and softer than anyone I've known, and I've stopped trying to square it. The papers went through. Real paper, true paper, a quarter of the valley in the name of Wren Calloway, and Silas stood over the clerk in Santa Fe until the man wrote it the way it had to be written, and dared him with his old man's eyes to object to a woman's name on a deed, and the man did not object. She works the land. God, how she works it, the bad leg and all, that crooked old break that pains her on cold mornings, and she doesn't favor it. She decides not to, every morning, the way she decided not to the first day I saw her walk up out of the dust. She counts things still. So do I sometimes. In the evening we sit on the porch where Silas used to sit alone with his cold pipe, and we count the things that have to be counted, calves, fence posts, the days, and we don't always speak. And it's most of the way to family, which out here is most of everything. The money's still going home, a piece at a time. Prout left a trail and we follow it. There are Chiricahua people scattered now, hard to find, harder to convince that 3 dead white men and a girl from back east want to put something right after 31 years, and why should they believe it? Why should they take it? The same proud blood that wouldn't spend a gilt coin running through them still. It's slow. It's the hard version. It might not be done in my lifetime or Ren's. But it's being done, which Silas says is the only word that ever mattered, and he ought to know, having spent 30 years learning it the worst way a man can. Silas Hartwell is failing now. The lungs the Santa Fe doctor gave up on a decade back have finally started to agree with him. He doesn't fear it. He told me last week, cold pipe between his teeth, watching the dark come down over a south range that a girl named Ren now owns a quarter of. I voted right and did wrong, Cobb, and I spent 30 years thinking those canceled out to nothing. They don't. Nothing cancels, but a man can put new things in the account. She's a new thing, the stone's a new thing, the money going home's a new thing. He took the pipe out. Tom didn't send her to forgive me. You were right about that both times. He sent her so I'd have the chance to do the keeping before I run out of days. That's not forgiveness. That's better than forgiveness. That's work. And a man who dies in the middle of honest work. He didn't finish it. He does that now, leaves the ends off, and I've learned not to push, because some endings aren't ours to carve. I keep the ledger still. The line I started that first dusty afternoon runs over 3 pages now, and I've decided I'll stop adding to it the day the last of Claw's money finds its way home. Whenever that is, however long after I'm gone, I've told Ren where the book is, and she counts things too. And she'll close the account when it's time the way I close the stone, with an unsteady hand and no shame in it. The last thing I wrote, just last night, watching the lamp burn down in the window of a room that used to be the spare room and is now hers, in the house that is now a quarter hers, on land that a proud man should have owned and a coward sold, and a daughter walked 9 miles to begin to buy back one honest day at a time.